Hello, everyone. So it's been a while since I have done a book review, but I do have a fairly new book here. I think it's came out like a couple weeks ago now, called the Basic Go Technique. So I can get that in the frame. That's from 25Q to 1 Done, and it's by the person I know it is as Kango9. Well, it's a little blurry there, but his last name is I guess is George. We can call him that if we really want to. Probably just keep calling him Kango. Generally, when there's a new book that comes out that's something about the basics or the fundamentals, I really, really enjoy getting those books because I have my idea of what I consider to be the fundamentals. I like to see if anyone else kind of agrees or if they have some other ideas. And through reading other books like these, I have changed my mind on a few things over time. So always like to get a new perspective or fresh ideas about something. When Kango9 actually contacted me and told me that his book was coming out, he was wanting to send me a copy so that I could review it. I decided to say yes. Usually I would have bought it myself, but he did insist that he wanted to get me a copy because he wanted me to read it anyway. So I did that, and it was actually kind of fun to read. I do want to start off with saying that it wasn't like a very technical book to try to read through, something that was very boring. It was actually like pretty conversational. It sort of feels a little bit like he's just talking to you and like you're his student and he's giving you advice on things. That's sort of the feeling I got when I was reading the book. So I actually do like that. It's different in that regard. But one of the problems that I was having while reading this book, well, I guess there were a couple small things, but one of the main problems that I was having while reading this book is that I just wasn't agreeing with everything that he was saying. I think it's definitely okay if we all have somewhat different perspectives and different ideas of what's kind of important. But the way he was describing some of these things, it's not at all about like how I really think about the game. But then at the same time, the way he was describing the ideas, like he would say something, which I'd be like, no, that doesn't make sense. And then he would describe what he's saying. And I'm like, well, that makes at least a little bit more sense. Like I'm kind of doing that in my games, but it's not how I'm thinking about it. And so that was sort of something that made me feel a little bit awkward while reading it. It seems like he's wrong and right at the same time. So that was a little bit confusing in my mind here. But the reason I bring that up is because the book isn't about how to play the opening, how to play, how to do a specific Joseki or anything very technical like that, even though it says techniques. It's more about how to make better decisions and how to think about the game. And I think if you follow exactly what he's saying, you probably will be thinking about the game in mostly a correct way. There are just a couple of things that I think he emphasized that I would definitely not emphasize. If we go to the second chapter, which is actually, I would sort of consider the first chapter, it's about Sente, but he also outlines what he thinks are the important elements that he says make a real difference in the game. And he says the first one is Sente, the second one is strong groups and accurate reading, and the third thing is good exchanges. Now, I actually don't know if I really remember him talking too much about good exchanges. He did say that was one of the most difficult parts, but he did talk a lot about the first two things. I feel like he's not wrong necessarily, but it's not, as I said, it's not really how I think about the game. Whenever I'm playing the game, I'm actually not really thinking about Sente too often, but I am thinking about strong groups. And he says Sente is sort of like the most important part of the game up to the Dawn level. Then after you reach the Dawn level, Sente is still important, but now you can focus on other things or something along those lines. But I feel like having strong groups, maintaining strong groups and a strong position on the board is actually more important than anything else because how do I say, it's not about always defending your groups necessarily, but if your groups are strong, your opponent can't always attack you and you can actually attack them more severely. And playing strong groups does not mean you're playing groups without weakness. It's just you're playing groups that you know how to handle, which he kind of says a similar thing in some ways, but it just didn't feel quite the same. Now let's talk about sort of what's in the book altogether now that we've sort of gotten that part over, and then we can sort of talk about what I did like and what I didn't like. So the very first chapter is a terminology chapter. It didn't necessarily need to be a chapter itself. You didn't have to label it that way, but perfectly fine. I did learn some stuff in that. I don't normally read those sections, but I did learn some stuff. The thing that didn't make sense to me though was that in the terminology section, he would tell us like here's the Japanese name for this word that we also have a word for in English, like the pincer. But in the book, he would just say pincer. So was there a reason to show us the Japanese term apart from just wanting to show the history? And that was a little bit confusing in that aspect. Like there's no reason to introduce those ideas or those words if you aren't going to be using those specific words in the book themselves itself. So kind of some unnecessary information, but it was still kind of fun to read, so it didn't bother me too much. I gotta be honest. Like thinking about it bothers me more than actually when I was reading it. So it's not a big deal. But chapter 2 is where it really starts. I said chapter 2 is about Sente. Chapter 3 is Tesuji. Chapter 4 is good shapes and bad shapes. Chapter 5 is attacking techniques, territory techniques. And then chapter 6 is choosing the most important move. In each of these chapters, except for the last one, I think technically, except for the last one, in each of these chapters, there's also sumego, around like 10 to 16 problems for each section to try to help you learn what you're reading about or what you just read about to reinforce the ideas. Something that he does that's kind of unique, actually, is that the sumegos are actually repeated, but from different perspectives. I thought that was actually really, really smart. So in the Sente section, you'll see one, and the Tesuji section, you might see the same one, but we're looking at it from the lens of Tesuji versus from the lens of Sente, and you may even see it again a little bit later. And then at the very end of the book, there is an end section, of course, but then there's also like 50 sumego to sort of test if you've understood the idea. I think the sumego was actually pretty good. I didn't really notice too many mistakes. There might have been one, but I'm not 100% certain if it was really a mistake or just a difference of opinion, honestly. I think he actually did a pretty good job with the sumego. It was actually kind of fun to solve them. None of them were really too hard for my level, but I feel like they were probably a bit too hard, like especially if you were actually a 25Q, because this says from 25Q to 1 Dan. 25Q might not be able to solve the majority of the problems in this book. And that brings up one of the other issues that I kind of have with the book is that I feel like it's not really 25Q to 1 Dan. I feel like this is more of a single-digit Q to 1 Dan type of book. If you're a brand new player, you could read this, but I don't know how useful it would be for you. Like the ideas, not necessarily terrible, but I think if you're an SDK trying to get to 1 Dan, you'd be able to solve a lot of the problems and then struggle with a couple of them instead of struggling with the majority of the problems. I might be a little bit biased when it comes to sumego because I did it probably a little bit differently than a lot of other people did. One thing that he did do that I think was extremely important, and I think this needs to be emphasized quite a lot more, is is telling you that when you're making decisions in the game, you need to always be thinking from your opponent's perspective. That is something that I very much highlight myself. I don't know if I say it enough in videos, but definitely when I'm talking to my students, one of the things I mention all the time is that you need to consider what your opponent would want to do, or what's the shape move from your opponent's perspective. Sometimes that tells you the move that you need to play. It's from one of my favorite proverbs, basically, is your opponent's vital point is your vital point. I really, really like that idea, and I use that all the time whenever I'm playing and whenever I'm teaching. I think that was extremely important, and how he's telling you to think about the game, I think, is basically correct. Like I mentioned earlier, just some things I don't really agree with. For example, the chapter on Sente, a lot of the stuff that he was mentioning about when it comes to Sente, I'm not thinking of that as a Sente move. Like one of the examples was a life and death problem. And he was saying, well, play the Sente moves first and then do the next thing. But the Sente moves, I would have actually called them the reduction moves first. It's the outside moves. You play these outside moves to reduce the ice space as much as you can. After the ice space has been reduced, if you can't reduce it anymore, you have to look for the vital point. And after you play the vital point, you need to do any sort of extra cleanup you need to do. Like if you have to reduce again from the outside, or if you have other sort of things to go along with that. But he thought of it from the perspective of Sente moves. But if you're good at reading and you play that move to reduce the ice space from the outside, it's not a Sente move. You're killing the group. If they understand that it's dead, they tanuki you. That means it's not Sente. So there are like some things where I didn't quite agree with what they were saying. I think I understood why, like looking for moves that would be Sente feeling in a sense, but it didn't quite make a lot of sense to me. The Tesuji section was perfectly fine. He just goes over like a handful of Tesuji he thinks are important to look at. The good shapes and bad shapes, we'll get back to that one. The attacking techniques, the territory techniques, and like he talks about like Ko and like a bunch of other things like that, and that was all perfectly fine. I think there's better information that you can get from other books or from checking things out online. But it just sort of like does like an overview of a lot of things, but it doesn't really teach you in depth. And he does give some suggestions, like in the attacking section, he does say, check out the book Attack and Defense, because that's going to give you more details about what I'm talking about here. But it feels like he's just very lightly going over the details about Go and telling you how to think about it, which I guess was the purpose, but it feels like even after reading everything, I'm not exactly sure what I was supposed to learn. Like, not 100% sure. But if it does change the way you think about the game, even if it just tells you consider things from your opponent's perspective even more, maybe that's already good enough, I got to be honest. Now, there was a section I really liked the most called Choosing the Most Important Move, and I actually have the board set up over here so that we can look at that. I guess I have it this direction. I have two screens. So we have the board set up over here so we can look at one example that I thought was actually kind of nice. I liked this idea. Maybe there was a better way to do it, I don't know, but I definitely liked the question he was asking about this section. But before we do this, I do have to mention the good shapes and bad shapes, the whole shape section. Man, let me get to the actual page here. So page 84, let me get in there. Something that is a little bit strange, by the way, for the shapes here, or not for the shapes, for the diagrams here, we do have color diagrams, which you don't really see too often. They are a little bit blurry. They could just be screenshots or something. I'm not exactly sure, but they're clear enough to see everything, so it's not really too big of a deal. It could also be like a printing issue, not necessarily the images themselves, because it is just an Amazon published book sort of thing. So I know sometimes they have some questionable printing things in general, and that's definitely not his fault. That's just, if you want to do something, you got to publish it somehow, right? The shape section, I wasn't necessarily 100% sure of and how they sort of handled this. Shape is one of the things I think about the most in the game, or at least think about the most when trying to teach as well, because understanding shape to a decent degree is very important for the game. And really, it's like the bad shapes were kind of the main issue I had here, and then how to implement shapes into the game. Just felt like there were better examples or more important things to focus on. So let's actually go to the board real quick. Multiple stones here. Hopefully this isn't too loud. Let me turn down my volume real quick. Forget about the right side of the board for now. Just focus on this left side. One thing that I think is like an extremely important aspect of shape, one of the most useful things to think about in an actual game, is the idea of broken shape, which he doesn't even talk about in this. Even when he's talking about bad shape, he does not demonstrate broken shapes. So a broken shape can start with something like the elephant's eye, which he does talk about here. But a broken shape is when you're pushing and you're allowing your opponent to push through your shape. So black stone again, white stone here. What we have right now is one stone and another stone here. This is a 1-point jump. This 1-point jump is being pushed through from your opponent. So this is a broken shape. You can also think of it from the perspective of a knight's move. A knight's move being broken is like a really, really important bad shape to know about. If you can recognize when this shape is going to happen, then you can avoid many, many bad moves. Just this one idea. I think this is one of the most important ideas. Of course, he does talk about the idea of like the empty triangle being a bad shape, but he does correctly say the empty triangle is not necessarily a really terrible shape. It's just an inefficient shape, because what you should be doing most of the time is, instead of having this, you would want to be jumping instead of doing an empty triangle, because that's just more effective. It's already connected, etc. But what is the important aspect of that shape is kind of the thing that I wanted to see if he talked about. And the really important aspect of a lot of these shapes is the amount of liberties they have and how connected they are to the other stones that are around them. These three stones, even though they are not very efficient, they're a very strong and powerful shape. So you trade efficiency often for strength, or you trade speed, you could say, for strength. And then you can often jump pretty far away from these three stones because it can't really be cut. For example, with this one, when we're jumping towards the center, if our opponent tries to cut us this way, we're often going to be capturing them before they're able to do anything to us. Because of how the shape works here, you may even be able to go a little bit further back than this if we need to. Probably should be using real moves, not just placing stones on the board. But we may even be able to jump even further because we might be able to still, for the most part, maintain a connection because their stones are weaker than our stones. Shape is all relative to the stones that are around you, not just the literal stones that are on the board. One thing that I like to highlight that I learned from one of my favorite books is the idea that this is not a tiger's mouth. These are 2 diagonal moves, not a tiger's mouth. Or you think of it as a 1-point jump with a diagonal in the middle. When you add this stone in, it is now the tiger's mouth. Now, I'm being a little bit strict with that definition. We usually call it a tiger's mouth just because it looks like this particular shape, right? When you just have these 3 stones next to each other. But really what makes it a good shape is when we have another stone inside the tiger's mouth area that we're hunting over the top of. And that's what makes it a very strong shape, what makes it a good shape. You have a decent amount of liberties. You're taking away liberties from your opponent's stone, which is making your position stronger. We have other sorts of like important ideas when it comes to shape. And then the other thing that I think is really important to understand is just the idea that a jump is not necessarily the only part of a shape. I like to think of it as a building block of shape. So if the 1-point jump, what's this? This S still? Yeah. The 1-point jump, the diagonal, the knight's move, 2-point jump, and a lot of these end up turning into shapes. For example, when you have a Nobi here and a 1-point jump, and then another knight's move or 1-point jump, that creates the table shape, which is a very common and nice shape. Now, it's not completely always a table shape. It is best to think of it with other stones nearby. Sometimes this is what would make it a table shape. Sometimes it's not. And like getting this move in turns it into something else. Having this stone captured with this here is another type of shape. But all of these are built on the simpler ideas of like the Nobi, the Hane or the diagonal, right? We have knight's move here, 1-point jump, a Nobi, another knight's move, right? These are all connected to each other through those building blocks of shape. Now, I don't think you need to go into too much detail. It probably should be just an entire book all on its own, but it was a little bit annoying here seeing that, first of all, the most important idea, one of the most important bad shapes, the broken shape, was not really discussed, which I think was extremely, extremely important. And then the reason for shape being important, like liberties, connectivity, eye potential, none of that was really covered either. And that was a little bit annoying in that regard. But that's only because I've focused so much on shape. I'm sure some people would even disagree with the way that I classify and view it myself. So that was my biggest sort of gripe with the book, was the shape section. But I'm 100% biased, 100% biased in that regard. So don't worry about what I have to say about that. But after that, there was a section that I thought was really, really good or really interesting. I'm going to phrase it that way, I guess I should say. I thought it was very interesting, the choosing the most important move. As you see on the board, this is one of the examples from that section, the one that I thought was actually interesting. And the idea here is that black has 3 groups that they need to defend, right? These 3 groups, because if white plays first, white can kill some of these groups. So your goal is to determine which one is the one you should defend. Which one's the most important one? Which one's the most valuable one? Which one's worth defending, right? So if you want to, you can take a second to look at this and decide what you want. It's been on the board for a while now. You've been seeing it throughout this entire video. But the group that's the most important to defend is actually the one on the bottom. This one's the most important to defend. We'll just connect and capture. I don't know if this is the best way. We're just going with the simple way here. Most important to defend because the other ones have attributes about them or ideas regarding them that make it so that it's not worth defending them. This group in the upper right is just points. It's not a strong group that's cutting anything off or doing anything important. He doesn't necessarily describe it from this perspective. This is how I like to describe it. But these are just points that are not important. Points win you the game for sure, but just taking a move for only points is usually not what you're trying to do in the game. You're trying to often influence your opponent in some way, attack groups, or do something more active. But you don't always want to just take points and just live very, very small. Living small is more painful than just tanuking and letting them kill you most of the time. So we don't want to save this group. Later on, when it's like a big in-game move, we can save it, but for now, it's not that important. 2 moves somewhere else on the board are often worth more than 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like the 10 to 20 points that this is worth. If they take one, if you play away, they take another move to kill, and you play away again, you probably made up the value of losing those stones, if not getting a little bit more than that. They already have the strength on the outside, so there's no reason to do anything. This other group, you just can't really save. It's possible to figure out a way to maybe get it out and try to save the group, but is it worth doing? Well, I don't really know. And is it guaranteed that you can save the group? I'm going to say there's like less than a 50% chance. That's something he talks about. Like, is there less than 50% chance of you being able to save the group? And he also talked about how looking at it from your opponent's perspective, if black did try to save the group somehow, how would white respond to that and what would they do? And if it seems easy to attack the group and kill the group, then just don't try to save it. You should just make it as small as possible. Don't worry about it. So because it's difficult to save this group, we don't want to do it. And even if you do save the group, you don't get many points out of saving the group. You take away points from your opponent, but you don't gain many points for yourself. Usually you want to play moves that gain and take away if you can. This one, even if you live, you'll get like 2 or 3 points, but you're not going to get more than that. And so, by process of elimination, the group on the bottom is the most important group to save because you're gaining points. It's easy to save. We already know how to save it. We can just capture a stone. Very straightforward. It's saved. But we're capturing a stone. We're getting influence towards the left side. We have potential, right? We have some potential of growing more points. We actually gained quite a few points from capturing that stone. And it's just more useful group, a much more useful group. While I do like this example for the most part, I like the idea behind this. I think it's good to try to point this sort of thing out. It's probably not worth getting the book just for one section. I don't think the book is absolutely worthless to read, though. I think it's still very useful, but if I was going to recommend a book for this sort of range, 25Q to 1 Dan, there's quite a few other books that I think are more important. For example, making sure you have a very solid opening, from Opening Theory Made Easy to The Fundamental Principles of Go by Yilan Yang. Or if we wanted something that sort of had a little bit of everything in it, I really like, I like this book way more than I expected to, but it's the Let's Study Go, was it there? 1,000 Fundamental Problems to Become 1 Dan by this other guy. I don't know his name. It just had a really good bit of random bits of information that were actually very useful to learn about. And then it just has a ton of Go problems. Now, I don't think this is a one-stop sort of shop to learn everything that you need to know in order to get to 1 Dan. I think it's more of a supplementary material. While you're learning other things from videos, from other books, or just from studying with other people or your teacher or anything like that, you can do these 1,000 fundamental problems to then reinforce a lot of what you're learning, maybe even learn a couple new things and then get even further on. These books technically actually go together pretty well. They do complement each other for sure. But if I was going to suggest one over the other, it would probably be the Let's Study Go book over the basic Go techniques. Or, like I said, more topic-specific books rather than this one necessarily. It does focus a lot more on how to think, though, which means so if you feel like you have an issue with how you're approaching Go or how you're thinking about the game of Go, then this is definitely a book that you can get to try to help yourself with that. That's also what I try to focus on in my own videos, or trying to teach you how to think about the moves, not necessarily the move itself. So I'm always thinking, oh, I need to defend. And so we find a move that defends. I need to have a plan for this. So we find a move that accomplishes that particular plan. And that's basically what he's also trying to do in his book. And so while I did enjoy reading it, it's hard for me to recommend as something that everyone should buy. I have learned a lot more about Kango9 over the last couple of weeks. He seems like he's actually very passionate and that he does really care, and he wants people to get better at the game. It's not just about selling a random book just to earn a bunch of money or anything like that. So if you want to support him, I definitely suggest getting the book in that regard. Or if you already have a lot of other Go books, definitely get it as well. It's probably not the one I would recommend if you're a brand new player, like a brand new DDK, trying to understand the basic Go techniques like it's saying here. It's not really going to help you with that. But if you've already read other books, you're looking for something a little bit more unique and interesting, that's where this could change how you perceive the game to some degree. Even though I disagreed with a few different sections of the book, I'm going to say that apart from the shape section, I'm going to say a lot of the other things are my opinion on it. I don't think that Sente is as important, or the way he views Sente is correct necessarily, but that doesn't mean I'm correct either. It could be that he's talking about it from in a good way, and I just don't understand the way he's talking about it. So it's up to you to decide for sure. I'll definitely leave a link in the description so you can find the book. It is only available on Amazon, and I'll probably just have a US link. So if you need something else, you can look it up and make it a little bit easier for yourself. But I don't know if you can get it everywhere in the world. I just know I can send a link. I just know I have a link for it. Anyway, if you'd like to see a different book review, one thing I'm very much considering is Mastering in Basic Invasions, or Mastering Invasions by Yunkyo. I definitely want to get that. See if I like the book. See if it's fun to read, and I think she even has some videos to go along with it. So I'll have to see about that one. But if there's any other book that would be interesting, and maybe I should just review that 1,000 Fundamental Problems to Go to One Dawn next. Let me know what you're thinking, and let me know if you are interested in this book. Even though I said I'm not 100% endorsing it, are you still interested in the ideas that it's presenting? Do you want more books like this? I think it'd be kind of interesting to see, like if you want to make another book, maybe go into more detail on things. That could be really interesting. But for a brief overview, you get an idea of how he thinks about the game as an 8-Dawn, 9-Dawn player. It's a 7-Dawn, 8-Dawn player. My bad. 7-Dawn, 8-Dawn player on Fox. You get a good idea of how he tries to think through the game. Maybe that's going to help you as well. Anyway, hope you guys are having a good day and have fun.